Brachiosaurus, the one who watched the sky fall. Before the world learned fear, before the ground carried scars, there was a place where the air grew thin and the sky felt close enough to touch. In that place, something immense stood quietly among the trees. A Brachiosaurus. Its body rose like a living hill, legs planted deep in soil that had never known hurry. Its neck lifted slowly, one measured movement at a time, until its head disappeared into drifting mist high above the forest floor. From up there, the world looked different. Sounds softened. Movement slowed. The small worries of the ground, the Brachiosaurus did not rush its feeding. It never had. Each leaf was taken carefully. Each branch tested before weight was placed upon it. Patience was not learned. It was inherited. Below, the forest breathed gently. Birds moved through branches without fear. Smaller creatures passed beneath its shadow and felt no threat. The Brachiosaurus was not a ruler, not a guardian. It was simply there. And in a world that changed constantly, that alone was enough. From this height, the land revealed its patterns. Rivers curved like slow thoughts. Plains stretched wide and unbroken. Storms could be seen long before they arrived, their dark edges rolling gently across the horizon. The Brachiosaurus watched it all, not with curiosity, not with concern. With quiet awareness, its heart beat slowly, deep within a chest built for endurance. Each pulse carried time forward at a pace the world seemed willing to follow. When the wind came, it reached the Brachiosaurus first. Up here, it was cooler, cleaner. The wind moved through the leaves near its head and whispered of distant places. Mountains far away, seas unseen, changes not yet felt below. The Brachiosaurus listened without knowing why. It always listened. Far beneath the towering body, the forest floor shifted with life. Predators passed through quietly, their movements sharp and alert. Herds gathered and scattered. Days unfolded and folded back into night. The Brachiosaurus remained. Its size meant it did not need to hurry, did not need to hide. Few things challenged something that lived halfway between earth and sky. Still, it was not careless. The legs that held it aloft were strong, but they were not made for sudden turns. Every step was chosen long before it was taken. When it moved, the ground noted. The legs that held it aloft were strong, but they were not made for sudden turns. Every step was chosen long before it was taken. When it moved, the ground noticed, but it did not fear. The Brachiosaurus placed its weight gently, as if reminding the land that it did not wish to harm what held it. Time moved differently at this height. Days blended softly together. Seasons arrived without announcement. Leaves grew, hardened, and fell away again while the Brachiosaurus watched patiently. Rain washed over its back and ran in quiet streams down its sides. Sun warmed the vast stretch of skin that faced the sky each day. At night, the stars felt closer here. They shimmered just above its gaze, steady and distant, unchanged by the movements of the world below. The Brachiosaurus lifted its head slightly higher on such nights, as if listening beyond the air itself. One evening, as the light faded gently, the wind carried something new. Not danger, not fear. A difference. The air felt heavier than it should have been. The horizon seemed less certain. Clouds gathered where none were expected. The Brachiosaurus paused its feeding. Its head remained high, eyes fixed on the far distance where the land met the sky. From above, it could sense what others could not yet feel. Change was coming, not sudden, not violent, but inevitable. The Brachiosaurus did not lower its head, did not retreat to the safety of the trees. It stayed where it was, tall, still, watching the world from the highest place it knew, because some creatures were meant to run, some were meant to fight, and some were meant to witness. The wind reached the Brachiosaurus long before it reached the ground. Up here, where the air thinned and cooled, every change announced itself quietly, like a thought forming before words existed to hold it. The leaves near its head stirred in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not stronger, not colder, different. The Brachiosaurus paused with a branch between its teeth, holding it there without biting down, as if listening through the wood itself. Below, the forest continued as it always had. Insects moved through shadow. Small bodies rustled in undergrowth. Nothing. The wind reached the Brachiosaurus long before it reached the ground. Up here, where the air thinned and cooled, every change announced itself quietly, like a thought forming before words existed to hold it. The leaves near its head stirred in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not stronger, not colder, different. The Brachiosaurus paused with a branch between its teeth, holding it there without biting down, as if listening through the wood itself. Below, the forest continued as it always had. Insects moved through shadow. Small bodies rustled. Night arrived gently. Not suddenly. Not with drama. The light simply softened, edges of the world blurring until shapes became suggestions and movement slowed to near stillness. The Brachiosaurus remained awake. It often did at night. Sleep came easily to a body this large, but rest did not always require sleep. Sometimes it was enough to stand quietly and feel the world move around you. Below, the forest settled. Calls faded one by one, wings folded. The ground cooled. But the Brachiosaurus felt none of the deep calm that usually accompanied these hours. The air pressed more firmly against its skin now. Breathing felt heavier, as if each breath carried more weight than before. The stars above shimmered faintly, their light unsteady, as though seen through disturbed water. The Brachiosaurus tilted its head, studying them with slow curiosity. The sky had always been constant, a ceiling that never lowered, a presence that never interfered. Tonight it felt closer. Not threatening, just near. The first tremor was so faint it barely deserved the name. A subtle movement passed through the legs, up from the soil into bone, then faded before it could be understood. The Brachiosaurus did not move. Large bodies learned early not to waste energy on uncertainty. Moments later, the tremor returned. Stronger this time, enough to loosen dust from the bark of nearby trees, enough to ripple the surface of puddles left by old rain. Still, the forest did not flee. The animals below felt it too, but not yet as danger, only as confusion. The Brachiosaurus lowered its head slightly, bringing its gaze closer to the ground, as if to reassure itself that the world was still where it belonged. The ground answered, not with collapse, but with a slow, uneasy shifting, as if it were adjusting its own weight. The Brachiosaurus widened its stance just a little, planting its feet more firmly. The soil held. From this height, the Brachiosaurus could see farther than any other living thing. And now, what it saw was troubling. Along the distant horizon, a faint glow had appeared. Not bright, not sudden. A thin line of color pressed upward against the dark, like dawn arriving far too early. The Brachiosaurus watched without moving. This was not sunrise. The light was wrong. Too steady. It did not flicker like fire, or soften like morning. It simply existed. The air vibrated faintly, not enough to make sound, but enough to be felt deep within the chest where balance lived. The Brachiosaurus exhaled slowly. It did not know what the glow meant, but it knew this. Nothing that changed the sky did so without consequence. The night stretched on. Time slowed further. each moment expanding as though the world itself were reluctant to move forward. The tremors continued, irregular, unpredictable, not strong enough to break the ground, not gentle enough to ignore. The Brachiosaurus stood through them all. Its long neck curved slightly now, head angled toward the glow, eyes fixed on the distance it could not reach. Breathing required effort. The air felt thick, as if it resisted being taken in. Below, the forest began to change, not fleeing, but quiet. Calls stopped. Movement slowed. The Brachiosaurus felt the shift ripple outward from the ground up, as if the land itself were holding its breath. And still, nothing arrived. No fire. No wind. Only waiting. The kind of waiting that carried meaning. The kind that came before things that could not be undone. High above the world, standing where the sky felt close enough to touch, the Brachiosaurus remained. Patient, immense, watching as the future gathered itself just beyond the edge of sight. The air shifted again. Not suddenly, not sharply. It sagged. As if something unseen had pressed down on it from above, changing the way it rested against skin and leaf alike. The Brachiosaurus felt it immediately. Up here, where the sky felt close, even the smallest imbalance carried weight. The long neck stiffened slightly, muscles tightening not in fear, but in adjustment. Breathing became slower now. Each inhale felt thicker, as though the air resisted being moved. The Brachiosaurus tested the feeling by lifting its head higher, stretching into the thinness above the trees, seeking the clean currents it had always known. They were gone. In their place was a strange heaviness. Not heat, not cold, but pressure. Below, the forest seemed unchanged. Trees stood as they always had. Shadows lay where they should. But the Brachiosaurus understood something the ground did not yet know. The sky was no longer resting where it belonged. At first, it was barely noticeable. A low vibration, so deep it did not pass through the ears, but through the chest and bones. The Brachiosaurus felt it as a faint trembling inside itself, as if its own heartbeat had momentarily gone out of rhythm. It paused completely now. No feeding, no shifting. Stillness returned, but it was no longer peaceful. The sound, if it could be called that, did not come from the forest, nor from the horizon. It seemed to exist everywhere at once. A quiet, endless hum, as if the world were holding tension and had not yet decided how to release it. The Brachiosaurus lowered its head just enough to bring its gaze back toward the land. The ground answered with a tremor, not strong, not violent, but undeniable. Something vast was moving. And it was not moving through space. It was moving through the world itself. It seemed to exist everywhere at once. A quiet, endless hum, as if the world were holding tension and had not yet decided how to release it. The Brachiosaurus lowered its head just enough to bring its gaze back toward the land. The ground answered with a tremor, not strong, not violent, but undeniable. Something vast was moving. And it was not moving through space. It was moving through the world itself. Now, that distance mattered. Another tremor passed through the ground, stronger than the last. Enough to send ripples through puddles. Enough to shake loose bark from ancient trees. Still, nothing fled. Fear had not yet found its shape. The Brachiosaurus shifted its weight slowly, spreading the load evenly across legs that had carried it for decades. The soil held, but it no longer felt endless. Now, that distance mattered. Another tremor passed through the ground, stronger than the last. Enough to send ripples through puddles. Enough to shake loose bark from ancient trees. Still, nothing fled. Fear had not yet found its shape. The Brachiosaurus shifted its weight slowly, spreading the load evenly across legs that had carried it for decades. The soil held, but it no longer felt endless. The glow returned, not brighter, wider. It stretched along the horizon now, a pale band of light that did not flicker or fade. It simply existed. The Brachiosaurus fixed its gaze upon it, neck curving gently, bringing its head into perfect alignment with the distant line between earth and sky. This was no fire. Fire danced. Fire moved. This light was steady, uncaring. The air vibrated faintly again, enough to set leaves trembling and send a low shiver through the massive frame that stood above them all. The Brachiosaurus exhaled slowly. It had watched storms gather. It had seen floods rise. Those events carried urgency. This carried inevitability. The first true pressure arrived without warning, not force, but weight. The sky seemed to lower itself, pressing gently at first, as if testing how much the world would tolerate. The Brachiosaurus felt it across its back, along the long curve of its neck, in the deep spaces between ribs. Breathing required effort now. Each inhale felt earned. The ground responded with a deeper tremor, one that rolled outward and did not stop quickly. Trees swayed without wind. Dust lifted in thin veils and refused to settle. The Brachiosaurus did not retreat. It did not lower its head to the forest floor. Instead, it stood taller, neck extended, head raised. If the sky was moving closer, then it would meet it as it had met everything else, without hurry, without fear, watching the world change from the highest place it knew. A deeper tremor moved beneath the forest now, slower than the ones before it, but heavier, as if the land itself were adjusting to a new weight. The Brachiosaurus felt it rise through its legs, up through joints that had known countless seasons, into the massive frame that stood above the canopy. The vibration did not pass quickly. It lingered. Trees swayed gently, their movements delayed, as though the earth had sent them instructions they were slow to understand. Dust lifted from the forest floor, hanging in the air longer than it should have, turning the space between trunks into a muted haze. The Brachiosaurus widened its stance once more, a careful redistribution of balance, not out of fear, but respect. The ground was changing its mind, and nothing, no matter how large, stood unchanged when the land itself began to move. The low vibration deepened. It was no longer something felt only inside the body. It began to press outward, softening the edges of sound itself. The forest grew quiet, not silent, but distant. Calls that should have carried fell short. Movements that should have echoed died close to their source. The Brachiosaurus tilted its head slightly, listening not for danger, but for meaning. The sound had no direction now, no beginning, no end. It surrounded everything, a constant pressure, as if the world were humming to keep itself together. The glow along the horizon pulsed again, brighter this time, casting faint color across the underside of clouds that had gathered without moving. The Brachiosaurus exhaled slowly. This was no storm. Storms passed. This was something else, something that did not intend to leave. Once, height had meant safety. From above, danger could be seen early. Distance offered time. Time offered choice. But now, the advantage of height was fading. The air up here felt heavier than below. Breathing grew more difficult with each passing moment, as if the sky itself resisted being disturbed. The Brachiosaurus lowered its head slightly, bringing its gaze closer to the treetops, seeking familiarity. The forest did not answer. Its colors had dulled, edges blurred, movement slowed. Another tremor rolled through the land, strong enough to send a wave through the massive body, testing balance in a way no predator ever had. The Brachiosaurus held steady, but it understood now. Being closer to the sky meant being closer to what was coming. The horizon brightened sharply, not like sunrise, not gently. The pale band of light expanded upward, spreading across the sky until it pressed against the darkness overhead. It cast no warmth, only clarity. Every shape became sharply defined for a moment. Trees etched in shadow, the long curve of the Brachiosaurus's neck outlined against the glowing sky. 37. The air vibrated violently now, a pressure that rattled deep within bone and chest, making stillness difficult to maintain. The ground convulsed beneath the forest, not breaking, but bending, as if struggling to remember its former shape. The Brachiosaurus braced. Muscles tightened along its back, legs locked into the earth. The light surged once more, and the distance between sky and land began to disappear. The heat arrived suddenly, not burning, not yet, but overwhelming. The air pressed inward, crushing sound, flattening movement, forcing every breath to fight its way in. The Brachiosaurus lowered its head fully now, neck curving downward in a slow, deliberate arc, not to flee, but to endure. The ground shook violently beneath its feet, trees swaying wildly, some collapsing outright as the soil beneath them failed. Dust and debris rose together, filling the air with choking grey, erasing distance entirely. Sound crashed across the world at last, a roaring, tearing force that felt endless. The Brachiosaurus stood through it, not because it believed it could survive, but because standing was what it had always done when the world demanded everything at once. In that moment, as sky and earth closed the space between them, the tallest creature to ever walk the land became very small, and the world began to break. The sound did not stop all at once. It thinned, stretched, pulled long across the world until it became a low, endless roar that seemed to sink into the ground itself and remain there. The light faded next, not disappearing, withdrawing. Colors returned in fragments, grey, darker grey. Then something like night. The forest was no longer a forest. Ash and dust filled the air so completely that distance lost its meaning. The space between tree and tree collapsed inward, leaving only shapes that suggested where things had walked. The Brachiosaurus still stood. Its immense body was coated in fine grey powder now, its outline softened, its height less distinct against the darkened sky. Breathing came slowly, with effort. Each inhale burned. Each exhale carried heat away into nothing. The ground beneath its feet had changed. What was once firm now shifted unevenly, rolling gently as if unsure of its own shape. The Brachiosaurus adjusted once, just enough to remain upright. Then it waited. Time began to stretch. Moments no longer arrived cleanly, but bled into one another until it was impossible to say how long the darkness had lasted. Ash continued to fall. Soft, persistent. It collected along the long curve of the neck, settled into the folds of skin, and muted the colors of a world that had once been green. The heat faded slowly, leaving behind a deep, aching cold that crept upward from the ground. The Brachiosaurus shuddered once, not violently, but enough to remind the body that warmth was no longer guaranteed. Somewhere far beneath the forest floor, the earth continued to move. Low rumbles passed endlessly below, quiet but constant. The breaking was not finished. The Brachiosaurus closed its eyes briefly, not to sleep, to endure. When the Brachiosaurus opened its eyes again, the sky felt farther away, not higher. Empty. The clouds that once brushed its head were gone. In their place was a flat, heavy ceiling of ash and smoke that swallowed all sense of distance. Height no longer offered perspective. Everything existed at once, close and far, without boundary. The Brachiosaurus lowered its head further now, bringing its gaze closer to the ruined forest. The air was difficult now, Each breath scraped the throat. Each inhale felt shallow, as though the world had forgotten how to supply enough air for something this large. The Brachiosaurus slowed its breathing deliberately. In, hold, out. The rhythm became careful, controlled. The body had endured much, but it was not endless. Ash drifted across its eyes, stinging faintly, forcing slow blinks that left the world momentarily dark. The ground beneath its feet cooled further, hardening into something brittle. The Brachiosaurus shifted its weight again, a small movement, just enough to remain steady. Standing was still possible. For now. The world did not recover. It rested. A heavy, uneasy stillness settled over everything that remained, as if the planet itself were waiting to see what would rise again. No sounds of life returned. No calls. No movement. Only the soft fall of ash and the low murmur of the earth beneath it. The Brachiosaurus remained where it was, no longer towering above the world, but part of it. Its great body stood as a final marker of what had once been possible. 40 of height, of patience, of time measured in centuries rather than moments. As the darkness pressed close and the air grew thinner still, the Brachiosaurus lowered its head gently, not in surrender, in rest. It had watched the world change from the highest place it knew. And now, as the old world faded into silence, it stood long enough to witness what came after. 50.